All right. Welcome, everyone. We're so delighted to have you here today in the Boston Public Library to talk about the Associates of the Boston Public Library's Writer-in-Residence program. The Associates of the Boston Public Library established this fellowship in 2004, selected annually in a blind judging process. The Writer-in-Residence is an emerging, unpublished writer of a work for children or young adults who receives a stipend and a library office for a year to complete a full manuscript. At the end of that year, the writer presents the manuscript to the president of the Boston Public Library for storage in our archives. The Associates of the Boston Public Library just celebrated the 20th anniversary of its Writer-in-Residence program this year with a sold-out reception featuring Lois Lowry. In 20 years, there have been 22 writers honored, and more than 80 books from those writers are published or forthcoming to date. The fellowship's investor just raised the writer's stipend to an astonishing $50,000. So a big thank you to the associates. Absolutely, I think we should have some applause. So I'd like to introduce you to our panelists today. My name is Laura Koenig. I'm the team leader for Children's Services here, so I work with kids over in the other building, and I'm lucky enough to have these wonderful writers with us every year here in this side in our historic building. Our first panelist next to me here is Jen DeLeon, the award-winning author of YA novels Don't Ask Me Where I'm From and Borderless, as well as essay collections White Space, Essays on Culture, Race, and Writing, and editor of Wise Latinas, Writers on Higher Education. Jen is also an educator herself, and she's worked with both adults and young people, including here in the library. And her organization, StoryBridge, encourages people of all ages to tell meaningful stories from their own lives. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you.
And next to her is Elaine Dimopoulos, who is the author of middle grade novel Turn the Tide, YA dystopia Material Girls, and 2024 Massachusetts Book Award honor title, The Remarkable Rescue at Milkweed Meadow, and its sequel, The Perilous Performance at Milkweed Meadow. Much like our other busy panelists, Elaine is also an educator and mentor to aspiring writers of all ages. And finally, Autumn Allen. Autumn Allen's debut novel, All You Have to Do, was called one of the best YA books of 2023 by Kirkus. And while she's visiting us today as an author, Autumn also is an educator, a consultant focusing on diversity in literature and discussing social justice and race with young people, and an editor working on picture books and board books at Boston's own children's book publisher, Barefoot Books. So welcome to all three of our panelists.
Thank you.
And I am so delighted to have all three of you joining us back here in this space where you spent some time working on some of those novels that we talked about. Can you say hello and let us know when you served as writer-in-residence and what you wrote during your tenure? Let's start with Jen.
Sure, yeah. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It does feel really special to be back in this building with so much history. My residency was during the 2015-2016 year, and during that time, I worked on a young adult novel, Don't Ask Me Where I'm From, and that was a very pivotal year in my life. It's when I secured an agent for my work and when I honestly started thinking this might actually happen, my lifelong dream of becoming an author.
Wonderful.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Dimopoulos, as Laura said. I was the 2010-2011 writer-in-residence. And I applied and was accepted with a novel that I was calling Eco Chic. It was a YA dystopia. It is a YA dystopia that critiques fast fashion and consumerism and our sort of obsession with trends. And it ended up getting published as Material Girls. So that came out in 2015.
And I'm Autumn, and I was the writer-in-residence from 2020 to 2021, which means I did not get the office because of COVID. But I got the support, and I was working on a young adult historical novel called All You Have to Do, which is set in 1995 and 1968, and follows the trajectories of two young Black men at prestigious schools who are trying to connect with Black culture and Black movements for liberation.
Wonderful. Again, welcome all three of you. One thing that I found really interesting and that I didn't know is that each of you applied to this fellowship more than once before your successful application. How do you think the act of applying to something like this changes how you conceive your project and even how your career might go? And did anything change between your initial application and the successful application that you eventually put in?
You want to kick it off?
Sure, I'll start. I was amazed to find out that all three of us had applied more than once, and I think that's something that really shows how a successful application is one that you've really thought through. So I think between my first application and my third, which was the successful one, I was working constantly on the book. I didn't just apply and then say, oh, I didn't get it, put it aside, and move on and then apply next year. I was taking classes, I was reading craft books, I was just sort of trying to figure out what my book was really going to be. I did a lot of research, and I think every time I filled out the application, describing my project, sort of pitching it, like honing that short pitch, really helped me to understand what I was writing about, what I was writing for, who I was writing for, and understand my project on a deeper level. So I think my relationship with my project really transformed every time I applied. And I think that was something, I was so comfortable with it by the third time. I was like, by the third application, I still wanted to get it, but I was like, I'm going to do this, this is going to be a book. By that time, it just felt like it's a book. And I was just thankful that, they saw that too.
Yeah. You want to go?
Sure. So my story is kind of the opposite in that I applied. I'll tell you the story of this journey because it started with the former student, and it's wonderful to see a former student in the audience right now too. So my former student sent me an email one day telling me about the Writer in Residence Fellowship at the Boston Public Library. And I was reading the email, and as soon as I saw children's literature or children's author, I immediately started skipping over. I was about to delete the email because I thought, I don't write for children. I'm not a children's author. I have my MFA in fiction. I had written a manuscript, an adult novel, as well as several short stories and essays. But something made me stop, and I thought, well, maybe I do write young adult novels. I literally Googled, what is YA? And I thought, I think I write YA, teen protagonist, lots of coming-of-age stories, contemporary realistic is what I was drawn to, and this is what I was doing in my short stories that I was submitting to literary magazines. And often editors would send me handwritten notes saying, we love your voice, we love your style, but this just isn't for us. And I took it as major rejection, like I'm not going to be a writer then, but really it's that I was writing YA. And so I decided to call my short story Chapter 1, and I made up a title, and I went on the YALSA websites and looked how they have one-sentence summaries, and I just wrote one for my novel, and I applied. And I did not get the fellowship that year, but I got a runner-up and really so many notes of encouragement. And the following year, I sent the exact same application, and I got it. So sometimes it really is a matter of timing. I have a professor who always said it's almost like two Ferris wheels that are next to each other. And one is like your craft, your work, and one is just the way that the world is happening at that time. And when the two of them touch and hit, that's when you get that electricity. And I think that's what happened that year. They just happened to hit at the same time.
And incredible that it really changed how you thought about your own work. That it made you think about. That's amazing.
Beautiful. Yeah, I feel like we have a lot of common threads here. So I knew about the fellowship because I was a student, an MFA student in the Writing for Children program at Simmons University, and my instructor was the first writer in residence, associate's writer in residence, Hannah Rogers Barnaby. So she had gone through it. She had come out and she was teaching writing and trying to get her book published, which it eventually did. And so I knew about it, and I too applied 3 times, and the first one with a novel that has never gotten published, is still in the drawer. And then I started my Eco Chic Material Girls project, and I applied the second time with it, and I was excited about it. I was excited about the project. I was like, this feels great. And I agree that the process of writing the application is so valuable, because even with the first one, I was like, I'm not sure this novel makes sense, because my application doesn't quite make sense. But I felt really good the second time, and I applied. And my phone rang, and Alan Andres, who has run the program for so many years, he chaired the committee of the Writer in Residence Committee. It was Alan Andres on the other end of the phone. He says, I'm Alan Andres, and I'm calling you, from the Associates of the Boston Public Library. And I said, yes. And he said, we're calling to tell you that you are the runner-up. And I was very happy with him on the phone. He said, we're telling you this because we really loved your project and we want to encourage you, to reapply, which I did, and I got it the next year. But we have since made a rule that the news has to go out that the person has been selected, and then we can call people that we want to, kind of lift up, which I think is a better order of things. The third year when I did apply, I'm still working on my novel. My gosh, sometimes the questions we get, they're like, I'm 3/4 of the way done. Is that too much written to, I know I'm supposed to write it over the course of the year, or I'm done. I've completed a first draft, but I really do think I have a year's worth of revision. That is fine. It takes a long time to get a manuscript in shape. So wherever you are in the process, you're welcome to apply. But by the time I applied that third time, I felt super confident about my work and more confident about my application. I was writing my synopsis. I was like, this makes sense. I dare those judges to turn me down this time, and of course they could have, but it worked out for me. But had I given up after that first rejection, had we all, we wouldn't be sitting here. So it's a good lesson.
So we know that there's just one person in this residency every year, and of course there are many, many people who are excited about this opportunity. When writers like you are getting those rejections initially, what else should they be doing to move this process along? Mm-hmm. I see Autumn nodding. Would you like to start us off?
Yeah, like I said, when I applied, that was just a part of my process that third time. It was like I had been doing the work, and I was on, maybe a second or third draft, and I had put in enough work to know that I was going to keep going no matter what. And to just have that community, I think, is really important to have a writers group that has whatever you need in it. If you need critique, that's great. Sometimes you don't need critique. Sometimes you just need accountability and encouragement. Sometimes you need resources and ideas, people who are also scouring, the newsletters and social media to find opportunities and who will share them with you. So I've had a few different writers groups over the years, and we all sort of do different things. But the key thing is that we're always looking out for each other. We're always sharing resources with each other and telling each other, well, what about this? Do you want to try for that? And whenever anyone has something that they need read, we can say, hey, who's available? Even if we're not in our rhythm of meeting monthly or whatever it is. So having that community, I think, is super important. And then for me, I'm just a learner. I just have to soak up everything and try to figure out how to do it right. Spoiler, there's no way to do it right. But, to see how different people have done it, how people have crafted their stories so that I can take whatever works for my story and apply it and feel confident going through it. So to me, I think it's mostly community.
Yeah. You can't give up. That's the thing. There are so many talented writers in my MFA program, in workshops I've been a part of for years now. And truly, I think the person who, quote unquote, succeeds is the person who does not give up. Dreams have deadlines, and there are so many projects like the Writer in Residence program that you can apply for, but there is a 100% chance you will not get it if you don't apply, right? So the first step is just sending it out. And I know it can be scary because rejection is real, and it can tap into self-doubt and imposter syndrome that you might already be feeling. I know I did. But I remember going to the AWP conference one year, and there was a panel led by people who had organized an organization called VIDA. I forget what it stands for exactly, but they researched submissions and gender. And they found that at the time, when a man submits a story or a poem or an essay to a literary magazine, and gets a rejection, he will that same day send out another story or poem. Whereas when women are rejected, some of them spent up to 6 months before they submitted another essay or poem to a journal. And I never forgot that, and as sad as that statistic was, it kind of made me think I don't want to be that way. I want to just separate the emotional, creative author, writer self, and then almost have a business hat on, okay, this is math. I want the odds in my favor. And you want to apply to so many, fellowships, residencies, and don't take it personally, and don't see it as a sign from the universe that you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. there are so many applications, one person gets it, but that doesn't mean one person is worthy of getting it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. That's absolutely perfect. Yeah, just keep going.
So you each had a unique journey from your writer-in-residence application to where you are today in your careers. What do you think was most valuable to you about this program, and how was this residency a turning point in your writing lives?
Oh, sure, I can start. I mean, it was a huge, huge turning point. So before the residency, I mean, I didn't have an agent. I had the love of writing and the passion, but you know, when you're alone in a cafe, being like, will anyone ever read this? Will anyone ever care? It's just hard to kind of muster up that discipline that's needed day after day. So getting it and knowing that, you know, I had the accountability. I had to, you present your manuscript at the end to the president of the Boston Public Library, now it's David Leonard, and he takes it and it's archived, and it's really exciting. So you have to produce a draft of a full novel. That taught me how to be a writer. It really did. I think that was the most valuable part, just kind of having to show up every day. There's a requirement of 20 hours a week in the office or at home, if it's COVID. And it just, I mean, I realized, I said in the outgoing, there's a reception in the fall for the incoming and outgoing writer. I said I felt like Miss America. It was my year of Miss America, where I was like, I am the writer in residence this year. And it was the best kind of pressure. So that, I think, was so valuable to me. I guess I'll just stop there for now. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say in a word, Alan. I mean, you know, like just represents the commitment that the associates have to each and every fellow who comes through. You know, they don't stop thinking about it. It's not just like, okay, one and done, boom, bye, good luck in your career. You know, it's, you know, when I had my launch party, you know, Louisa helped me organize, you know, some of the people who recorded it, and you know, they put it up online for the associates. They're proud of us, you know. We are their, you know, their people, and so that feels really good. That it's a commitment, not just to, okay, yeah, this project will sell good, and then they can go on about their way. It's like you become a part of a community, and that back to community. It feels really good, you know, to have people have your back.
Mm-hmm. Right. There's such validation in getting the fellowship, and I remember that year, I think the office is still the same, right, where it's located?
Yes.
Now it is, yeah.
Okay.
I had a different one. But
Oh, okay. So the office, the back of the office, the wall is shared with the office of the president of the library, David. And so sometimes I would hear him on phone calls or typing or something, and that just made me sit up straighter. And I'm like, I better get to work, you know, because you're alone in that office, and I just can't tell you how many times I needed to leave to go buy Raisinets or another coffee or a sandwich, and eventually it's just you and that blinking cursor, and it's almost scarier to get what you asked for, because that's what I asked for, that space and time. And suddenly my heart was racing, like, can I actually do this now? But the space and time is key. I spent part of that year researching the METCO program, and the main character in my novel, Liliana, she's in the METCO program, which is a real program, the oldest desegregation program in the country. And I went and was able to shadow students at a local high school. I was able to sit with teens in the teen library and, you know, ask them questions like, okay, so in the lunch scene, Liliana is drinking milk, and they were like, oh, no. No one drinks milk, miss. And they said she would be drinking iced tea, Brisks. And I'm like, okay, taking note, right? So they helped me finesse those details, and I was a teacher in Boston Public Schools, so I felt like I had some knowledge, but there is nothing like sitting and really taking the time. The first 3 months of the fellowship, all I did was read. I would just get stacks of books and go back into that office and just read. It's such a privilege and honor to give your art the watering and the sun and the gardening that it needs to eventually flourish.
Can I just add, I feel like we need to all tip our hats, too, to the financial piece, because
Yes.
like, it really does take the edge off of that year. Like, you can spend the year reading and not feel guilty, like I should be working. You really can either, you know, depending on other sources of income, work, you know, part-time or not at all. And now, certainly with $50,000, you really, you know, can take the year and treat yourself. And there's no other program quite like it. So
That's wonderful. I know a lot of people in here are probably really curious about the application process, so let's peel back the curtain on that a little bit. You've all served as judges for residencies subsequent to this residency that you did here, and 2 of you have served on the Associates Writer in Residence Committee. Can you tell us a little bit about that judging process and what you think made your application distinctive, and also how other applicants can make their own proposals stand out? And I know, Elaine, that you had a lot to say on this, so let's go back to you.
Yeah, I'm happy to start with it. So I currently serve on the committee, the Writer in Residence Committee. Jen and I served on it for about 2 years together, and now I'm on it with Alan and some board members. And I've kind of done every part of it, so we will peel back the curtain here. So we got a lot of applications. We get a lot of applications. This year we got 240 applications, so that's how many people want it, and it's exciting. It's grown every year. I mean, my year was the record-breaking year of like 100 something, 181, I think, and it's even bigger now. So, or maybe it was, I don't remember. Anyway, the process is we have pre-readers, right, that vet the initial applications, and depending on the year, depending on the amount of applications, they might read 30, 40, or even 50 each. Usually it's about 30 or 40. And they put forth, and these are retired publishing folk, retired librarians. It's a bunch of book people who are friends of the program and have done this for a while. And so we break all the initial applications up. They read. They put forth their finalists, their top choices, and we haven't limited, so they can put 1 or 2 forward. So have we all done the pre-reading? Have you?
I
know?
never have.
Okay, so I did that for a long time. And then, so they put forth their finalists, and then there's one person, Alan is usually the one, I did it this year, who's taking those finalists and winnowing them down to a list of 10, if there are more than 10, and there usually are, because the pre-readers want it, but they're like, I love this one too, So we get that to 10, and then we bring in a panel, an odd-numbered panel of esteemed final judges, and it's an incredible who we get. It's awful. It's like really cool to be on the call with them, and since we've done it over Zoom the last few years, they are, vice presidents of Big 5 children's publishers. They are agents, working literary agents. I love and kind of insist on having an agent on the panel because it's really valuable to hear like what's in right now, like what would that agent look for? Because sometimes we, book people can be like, oh, it's so quiet and lovely, and they're like, oh. And then and authors, like really reputable children's and YA authors, librarians, booksellers, other people in the industry, and they take those 10, and it's a blind process for them. There are no names attached to applications, but they read so the application consists of a writing sample and a proposal, right? So you're writing, this is like, here's my project, and here is my writing about the project. And they deliberate for, usually it's about 2 hours or more, and select the winner. And I will say, let's see, what to say. People email me, I taught at Simmons, again, my students would apply, and I'm extremely ethical. As soon as I see a name, I'm like, oh, I can't even touch that application, someone else has to read. But I think for me, I'll speak personally, for me, the writing sample is it. It's where it's at. Because if your prose is just singing and, I am just diving into this voice and I'm riveted by this character, that's where I go first. I kind of, there's a little bit, you have to give your elevator pitch, like a 1-line summary of the novel. So I'll read that to orient myself and then go straight to the writing. And if the prose grabs me, then I will turn to the full proposal and read everything, right? And so, and if it doesn't, I might glance at the proposal and say, all right, I don't think this is it. So, I think there's sometimes tension between like the big idea, what do they call it? Like the
Concept.
the high concept book, and then the actual story. And sometimes I hear like, my book is kind of quiet in concept. It's not this like splashy thing. Is that okay? That is absolutely okay. Like my most recent book that won the Massachusetts Book Award honor it's a rabbit story. It's a story about animals. Like on the, if I were to pitch it to you, you'd be like, I've heard of this. I think those books exist out there. Yes, they do. But there was something special about, the voice and the story itself that lifted it. So yeah. And then I guess the last bit of advice that I have is, when you're putting together your proposal and you're writing about your writing, the most important kind of element in it, I think, is confidence. It's this tone of, you want to pick me because I am dead serious about this. I can see myself as a published writer. I can see myself as a success. I have this vision for this book and, the books that follow, where, we as the committee and the judges are going to say, wow, this person really seems to have it together. This isn't like kind of something they're taking a stab at on the side, even if it feels like it. We're all faking it a little bit, right, when we apply. But you want to come forth and really just say, like, pick me and you won't be sorry. Right, so that is, if you do, that's what my third application I think had that. I was like, I know I got this. Like, come on, I'm going to do it. I trust me. You can you give me this, and I'll run with it. So yeah, so I'll stop there. That's what I have to say about it. But I don't know if you have other things to add.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just talk about the final call, which is, the part that I participated in. And it seems like sometimes it comes down to a couple of people on the call being really passionate about a particular application. And that's what it was this year. And for me, it's the combination of the writing, the prose, being able to see it like, okay, this person's got it. They're, they have what it takes. But also something about the project itself being important, and feeling like I can see this in this classroom, I can see it in book clubs, I can see it, all these places where it's going to help people. And so, that's the educator in me, I guess, but just feeling like this has a place, and it's filling something that is not currently out there. Yeah. So that is, if you have any kernel of that, to just play that up, to just sort of say why this book, why right now, why it's important, what it's going to do for people. And to me, you sell me on the human side.
Yeah, totally agree. That's so beautiful.
So I know this looked very different for Autumn, but I would love to talk about sort of the experience of working in the writer-in-residence office here at the Central Library. And were there any opportunities that you had to engage with the library community outside of this sort of solitary activity of writing? I'm going to throw this to Jen because I know some of what she was able to do while she was here.
Right. I mean, the teen room is not that far from the office. And I think everybody has a spirit age, and my spirit age is 13. So I felt very comfortable in that room, and I didn't know since then, you can't just go to that room. Like, it's for teens, right? So I think after that, I had tried to, like after the residency, I tried to go in that room, and they were like, no.
You can go in to get a book.
Okay, you can't hang out. And I respect that, right? Because it's space for teens, but I just hung out there with this group of young women, and they were poets. We were sharing work, and it was very powerful. I don't know, I loved it. I loved talking with them, and they gave me some ideas. One of them I'll never forget. She said, have Liliana's birthday coming up, because that's a big deal for teens, like when their birthday's coming up. And it's like little things like that, that you can just get from actually hanging out with young people. And it was really a pivotal year, and everything you're saying is just really bringing me back. And with Autumn, her application, I was on the committee that year, and it's a blind process, right? So I actually thought that a man had written it. You have two male narrators, points of view. And when they revealed the name, I'm like, I mean, you did good. You tricked me. And I was like, wow. And then Alan said, would you like to be the one to call Autumn? And I'd never had that experience before. So it was really special to be able to track her down through Darren, your husband. I'm like, where is she? And make that magical phone call. But I do remember that discussion. And again, it's not that there aren't other projects that are worthy, right? Like, there's room on the bookshelf for all these projects, many of them, right? But what it came down to was, like you said, the story. Does this story, is it, Maya Angelou has this famous quote where she said that there's no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you. And I felt that way with Autumn's manuscript, like, this needs to be a book in the world. I can't imagine it behind, a laptop in Microsoft Word, like in the drawer. It needs to be out in the world. So it felt powerful to be a part of that, And I think the other piece of advice with applications is, at least for me, when I was submitting a lot early on, I tried to sound like, quote unquote, a writer. and I didn't use my voice as much. I was like, I know, I'll write like some old guy in the New Yorker, because that's who I saw being published. And I'm like, that must be what they like, But then the opposite was true, that once I went a mile deep, not a mile wide, and I wrote Liliana's voice, where it had sass and voice and attitude, and she took the mic from me, and it was like she did not let go. It felt alive, crackling with something that I hadn't really experienced before, because I finally I gave myself permission to write the story that I needed as a young person. And I think that's important when you're applying for residencies or anything, it's give yourself that permission to really write about the story that you want to have read maybe when you were younger.
Can I just jump in and really
Of course.
Follow that up? I two things. One is that Jen's piece, since we're kind of incestuous here, was in my pre-read pile her year, and I remember putting it forth at the top and then leaving a long space. And I was like, maybe you could consider these others. It was so fantastic. And also, our current writer in residence is here, Isis Cano Santiago, and I feel like we need to, call you out and applaud you. Isis's book is called A Hypochondriac's Guide to Love, and there you go. It's gonna your sell on title alone, and so the concept is amazing, and the voice is incredible. It's an incredibly voiced young adult novel, and it's going to be a fantastic year for you. So it was a delightful experience watching the judging this year, and we're so happy that you got it.
Oh, welcome. Autumn, I am curious about your kind of experience, since it was very different from most writer in residences. Do you feel like you found any ways to kind of feel like part of the community of the library or writers in Boston, or was that because of your experience just difficult to make that connection?
That was difficult.
I'm sure.
Yeah. But, at the end of the day, it's the writing that needs to get done. And so I did the writing in the corner of my bedroom with my kids jumping on the bed. And it was funny because when my book came out and I was talking to someone in front of my kids, and someone asked, so how long did it take to write the book? And I said, about 5 years. And my daughter said, no, it didn't take 5 years. I didn't see you writing for 5 years. I was like, okay, remember when you were jumping on the bed and I was in the corner on my laptop? She's like, yeah. I was like, I was writing a book. She's like, all that time. So yeah, I just had to figure out a way to sort of, one book calls it a bunker. You kind of set yourself up in a corner of whatever you have. And I had a little chair and I had a little TV tray, and my husband was like, take a picture of that, because when your book is out, I want the world to know where you wrote this book. So yeah, it was not glamorous, but got it done. And the confidence, that I needed was key. So
wonderful. And we wish we could have had you here. So a last question, let's look ahead a little bit. Do any of you have anything you'd like to say about the state of children's and YA publishing now, and what emerging writers should be thinking about in their creative futures, and what kind of role this program, the Writer in Residence program, might play in those changes?
Big question.
A lot of thoughtful faces here.
Yeah, right? I mean, I think as we're seeing in literature now, and what we hope to see in the future, is more and more intersectionality. I think it's important to have the books that we didn't always see, the stories that we didn't always see, but there are more stories out there. I mean, I think about my own son, who's biracial, and he's Latino-facing, and his brother, my other son, is white-facing, but also Latino, so it's very much depicting their experiences on the page. I do have a children's picture book coming out, and I'm excited about that. So, yay! And it's very important, I think, to understand that we're not a monolith. The Latina community, there's so much. We contain multitudes, right? And it would be nice to see that reflected on the page as well. And the needle's moving slowly, but it is moving. I mean, from 10 years ago, the stats are different. Still dismal, but very different. Where Latinx characters in children's books are up to 7%, from 5% in 2018. But we are, as you know, or maybe don't know, about to be 50% of the population in some states. So there's work to do. And I think having books in multiple languages, having more mainstream publishers willing to publish books in Spanish, I think is really key. And so I'm excited. I'm a glass half full person, though, you know.
Well, I mean, I'll just give advice, I guess, for people who are looking at writing as a career or part of career. You know, I'm working on my second book right now, and part of the difficulty is balancing, because you have a book out, and so you're still dealing with that, and then you're trying to make space to write. But it's a very different thing to write when you already have work out in the world than when you were unknown and you didn't know if it was ever going to make it. And you know, so one thing is, if you're pre-published, cherish that time, because you'll never have that experience again of writing as if nobody's looking. And then just to think about what feeds you, just to sort of pay attention throughout your life as to what gives you energy, what feeds your creative self, what helps you have things that you're excited to write about and puts you in the mood and the energy to write. Because, you know, there are things that feed us and there are things that drain us. So trying to increase the proportion of things in your life that are feeding you versus the things that are draining you, so that you can sustain that creative self.
Yeah. I would say, in terms of like, everyone gets so panicked about the state of things, and in some ways it's legitimate, and we do, you know, we're moving the needle slowly, and it still needs to move. I think that the thing I've learned the more I've been at this is there's the writing, and then there's everything that surrounds the writing, is sort of what you're saying, Autumn, right? Like, and I remember not being published and going to something like this and being like, I just want to be up there, I want to do that, and this is great, and I'm happy here promoting the associates, but this is not actually crafting a novel, right? So you know, you kind of lose your mind when you get a book contract. You're like, oh my gosh, and now I can put it on Instagram, and I can, you know, blog and all this other stuff. And that's important, and I don't want to discount it, and I'm on Instagram. But I think that it's funny. So I had one book, Turn the Tide, come out. It was a middle grade novel in verse about environmental activism. Very proud of it. And I broke my back getting that book into the world. I wrote every kind of, you know, environmental organization I could. I sent people copies. You know, and the book did fine. I won the Green Earth Book Award. But the next book, The Remarkable Rescue at Milkweed Meadow, this animal story, I did relatively little for that. I mean, I still did a book launch, and you know, and the book just sort of, I spent a lot of time writing that book. I'm very proud of that book, and it just sort of did its own thing. It went into the world because librarians found it and loved it and gave it to students, because it won, you know, it got starred reviews. Like, it was my first time I ever got a starred review. And it's funny, I really, now with this perspective, I'm like, like, all that really matters is the writing. Like, it. You know, I want to be up here as an advocate, yes, and, you know, to get out there. But the most important thing is, you know, like you say, cherish that pre-published time. But like, even after you get published, you've got to go find it again, and you've got to focus on it. I would say, in terms of like the associate's role in kind of, you know, the future, I think, first of all, just doing what it's doing is fantastic, because it elevates a writer every year, and, you know, it just naturally, because we're seeking out new voices, is going to, you know, promote a diverse array of writers, and that's exciting. I think the country should look to it as a model. I really think that other organizations that have nonprofits who support libraries in major cities, or not, but major cities might be where, you know, the money is and the support is, can look to our program, and maybe we can do something to kind of say, here's what we did, and here's why it worked, and here's the kind of people we brought in. And you should do this, because this has been a success. Like, there have been 22 of us, and not every single writer got published, but the majority have, and I think we have, is it some over 80 titles of, you know, from 22 writers in 20 years published, over 80 titles. So, you know, this is amazing. Like, it's something to toast. So I think that, you know, and I think, frankly, with the raising of the stipend, $50,000, we're going to get many more applications than we've ever seen, and we may have to rethink the selection process. But I think, you know, that's another sign of success, though. So, yeah.
Oh, wonderful. I think we do have time for some questions from the audience. There is a microphone coming around, so if you would like to put your hand up, if you have questions for any of our wonderful panelists, we'd love to see hands. And if there are young people here, young people especially, let's go right here.
So it was mentioned that, like, the book that you needed when you were a child, but what about what the people need now? Like, it's, from what I've figured out and heard from other people, there's like a very different generational gaps. And you mentioned you took in the consideration of the teens, and I think that's really good. What prompted you to do that?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So I have to tell you that I started writing this manuscript set in the 90s, told in third person, in part because it was the book I needed, right? I was a teenager in the 90s, and I went to a children's writers conference in New York City, and I met with an editor for like 10 minutes, and she had read some of my pages beforehand, and she said to me, "Have you ever considered making this contemporary and first person?" And I thought, no and no, because I can't write a contemporary teen's voice. Like, I'm not a teenager. I feel like I couldn't do that. And first person is it's so personal. Like, it would be really hard for me to do that. But then I went home and it stuck in my mind. And this was April of my year at this residency. So I had April, May, June. And I'm like, am I going to change my whole novel? Yes, I did. It was like, scratch that, page 1. And that's when Liliana's voice came out. And I realized that after teaching middle school and high school for years, I mean, sometimes I had over 100 students on my roster. I couldn't get their voices out of my head. You know, what was I thinking? And so I thought, I'm going to take a stab at it. And here's the other thing, right? This is a writer in residency fellowship for a writer who has a manuscript in progress. We're not a publisher. And I think it's important to make that distinction, because you shouldn't feel like your manuscript has to be perfect, whatever that is, right, to submit your work.
Yes.
We are not publishing it and putting it on shelves. We are saying, yes, there's a beating heart here. Keep going, right? And I mention that because it will change. Your manuscript will change. And even when my agent and I sold the manuscript, I worked for 2 years with my editor in New York City, and we went through multiple drafts. And even then, you get something called first pass pages, where you get to see the pages as they're going to be printed, which is so cool. And even then, you're going in and making changes. So I guess I hope that answers your question. You know, I needed somebody to like encourage me to do that, but it's still the book I needed, because it's about a girl who wants to fit in. And that's the girl I was. I was moving between worlds, the white world and the Latina world, and all I wanted was to fit in. And that's the story that I wrote. Thanks.
Can I add? I think that's such a good question and so important to think about, for us to think about. And I talk about books with kids a lot, and young people, teens and tweens, and they have such strong opinions about, you know, why is every book like this? Why is every book like that? And I listen to that. I also think about a quote by James Baldwin, who said something like, you think that you're all alone in the world, you think you're the only person who's ever had this pain, and then you read a book and you find out that it's a human experience. And so when people were asking, you know, because I have 1968 and 1995 in my book, and people were asking, well, do you want to do 2020, you know, like a, you know, contemporary as well? And I was like, to some extent, it's all the same. You know, like the whole point of comparing 68 and 95 is that they're 30 years apart, but they're going through almost the same thing, you know? And so they can read that and say, wow, like, this is not the first time this has happened. They got through it, maybe we'll get through it, you know? So I think that connection to history and connection to prior generations is really important and something that's being lost. And when my kids finally read my book, they did enjoy it. They won't tell you, they won't admit it, but I could tell that they got something from it. So I feel good about it.
I can just quickly add, it's a great question. It's hard to do. It's really hard to do, and I find it harder the older I get, the more I'm away from my actual teenage years. But some kids want those books. I too had an experience with my first one, which was YA, where I didn't finish my story. I did not have an agent before I was the writer in residence, and then in the spring, I submitted to to agents, and I got 3 offers of representation. It was very exciting. And I got my agent, yay, we're off to submit it, and it didn't sell right away. And I, too, had a character that I had written in third person, and he's like, I don't know, we're getting this feedback, like people aren't connecting to this character, and I changed it to first person. And it's more than just changing pronouns, it's changing the voice. So that, I think, helps in sometimes, for readers to connect. But I will say I'm working on a current novel right now that's it's under contract, but it's very new. I'm just finishing the first draft, and I have to set it in the not so distant past. It's set in the late 90s, like 1998, because of historical reasons. Like it references some things that are happening. But I did my darndest to really make it. There's no kind of markers that really say like this couldn't be today. Like I think a reader could read that and say like this sounds like a kid from today, a 12-year-old from today, 12-year-old Greek girl. So that's my way of kind of getting at the solution without actually setting it in 2024.
And I hope you're asking that question because you're thinking about what young people would like to see, and we hope that we see your voice coming soon. I think we have another question coming in the back here.
Yes, thank you. I've got 2 questions. One quick question for Ms. De Leon. I was really intrigued by your description of how you got to April and then you had to change. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the specifics. Did you take the manuscript that you had and rewrote it, or did you start from scratch using some of the remnants that you had before? And then the other question that I have for the whole panel is, can you describe the community that you're experiencing now that you were on the Writers Program?
Yeah, great questions. I started again from scratch, like as in a new document. And the way I tricked myself into writing the manuscript, so I had the same plot points and key scenes. The ending was always fuzzy, right? But I knew her narrative arc for the most part. So what I did is I had those in my mind. I went to the new blank document, and I tricked myself into writing it by pretending that Liliana was telling another young girl her age the story. And that's how I got to write it, because I'm like, how would she say it to someone her age? Like, girl, let me tell you, and that's how she talks, right? That's how she writes. That's the whole book, I wasn't writing it for anyone but that one girl. And I just tried to put the bunk, what'd you call it, the bunker? Bunker. Yes, it's like that kind of tunnel vision. And it was still what Annie Lamott calls a shitty first draft, don't get me wrong, right? But it was starting to look like the book it was going to be.
Another question was?
Oh, yeah.
About community and what community you're feeling
yeah.
now.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's just a buddy. I mean,
We all text.
yeah. We think of each other, when there's something going on. Hey, do you know about this conference? Do you want to be on this panel? And boost each other, when we know someone else's book is coming out, let people know, and just always kind of have each other in mind for things. Just like you're sort of planning your career and sort of, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. You have your community in mind too, so that if you see something that's appropriate for someone else, you say, hey, what about this? And the associates also, do that for us, which is really amazing too. So it's kind of like graduating from a program and being an alum. You just sort of, you've been through this experience and you're sort of on this path, some ahead of others, and you just can kind of ask questions and get support, and yeah, it's just another writing community.
You should talk about your idea for like what we gather annually.
Oh, yes. So I got nervous all of a sudden. I'm like, what idea? To meet together in person, right, every December and just hang out at a cafe and talk shop and connect. And it really is, like, in this case, it's like the sum is greater than the parts, right? Like, because we get together and it's just incredible to be able to, like, ask Autumn about being an editor of children's books. And then, like, Elaine, I'm thinking about a middle grade novel. Like all these kinds of ideas and thoughts and questions. And we speak in schools and do assemblies. And so we talk about that aspect. I mean, there's so many parts other than the actual craft of writing. And that already is massive, right? But there's a lot to talk about. So meeting annually for coffee and lunch is really nice.
Any other questions today? Wonderful. I think a microphone's coming over for you.
Questions. First one is, how did your middle school and your high school experience sort of tailor your writing? And the second experience is more about today. How do you use AI? Do you use AI? Will you use AI?
I hate AI. I'll just go on record.
Yeah, we need T-shirts. I know.
It scares me. I don't use it. I know it's inevitable at some point. I'll have to make peace with it, but I'm not ready. As far as writing, as far as middle and high school, I think they were such formative years. You know, it's when you're really sort of figuring out who you are, where you fit in the world, your identity, and it's painful at the time. But you know, as you reflect back on it, and for me particularly, as I reflect back on my experience and comparing it with my siblings, so that you know, sort of thinking about the individual and the sort of environment, how that interplay results in, you know, a particular path as an adult. So I think it's just so much, like they talk about the compost, you know, like the experiences that you've had that sort of reside somewhere, and that's what you draw on for writing. A lot of my compost is in that area of, you know, middle school, high school, and trying to figure all of that out.
AI is something that we on the committee have talked about because we're on the lookout for applications that might, you know, smell of it. And it's funny, like we've had 2 years now kind of since it came out, and it's really, these are written by humans, right? There's just so much heart in them, and you can just tell there's a person behind them. And you can tell in the fiction, you can tell in the proposal. So that's been reassuring. And yeah, I loathe it as well. And then for me, the formative years were really the years of like where the Newbery Medal is. So like you read the Newbery Medals when you're like 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, maybe 6th grade. That was the period of my life when I was just, you know, like lit up by books and couldn't go to the library enough and couldn't read enough. And so those are my sort of like that I aspire to be kind of, you know, like Lois Lowry or Catherine Patterson or, you know, Phantom Tollbooth, like all the books that kind of I read. I think that's why I'm a writer, so yeah.
Nice, that's a beautiful question. I also want a T-shirt that says I hate AI. That sums up my thoughts on that. And as far as the formative years, I mean, there's so many points of no return when you are a teen or a tween, right? And so because of that, it makes it really ripe and exciting for fiction. Because you're doing a lot of things for the first time, or you're testing boundaries, pushing boundaries. And it's just exciting on that level of like suspense and conflict and tension and character growth. I just keep pulling from that, right? That's the well that's very full for me, and I won't stop. I don't think any of us will, right?
Yeah.
Any other questions this afternoon? Oh, wonderful.
Hi, my name's Ava. I just wanted to know, since you're writing middle grade and young adult, I just want to go more towards the background adult aspects of it. Were you in a full-time job while you were writing, and now that it's out and you have to promote it, come to events like this, if you are working, how do you manage that?
Oof. That could be a whole panel.
ECC, you can get up here and talk about your year too. I was teaching part-time. It actually worked beautifully because I was an adjunct writing instructor and children's literature instructor. I was teaching at BU at the time. So I had a maximally flexible schedule and a tiny bit of income that supplemented the very generous stipend. So I was able to make it work pretty easily, but I don't know about you both.
Still trying to figure out how to make it work. I homeschool, so my job never ends because, you know, people don't do what I say. So it'll be 10 p.m. and it's like, can you please do math? So it's just a constant sort of struggle. What I tell people is there's no such thing as balance, at least for me. I can't be like this part of the day for this part of the day for that. I just have to get obsessed. So I will have days where I'm obsessed with today, you know, I don't want to see dirty dishes laying around the house. Another day, it'll be, I have a job also. So today, you know, another day I'm editing this manuscript. I don't care, house can fall apart. I don't care, this thing has to be done today. And then another day, hopefully, it'll be, I've got to work on my manuscript. I've got to get a certain number of hours in or a certain number of words in, or yeah, just even like time, just sitting, staring at the wall, just thinking about it with the document open so that I remember I'm connected to this project. So for me, it's less about like balance and more about like putting out fires and making sure that my book is one of the fires.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
exactly right.
I was teaching in Boston Public Schools, and I went to part-time and eventually left, which was really sad. But I had a young son and was writing, and there were some tough choices, right? But I was able to make it work by adjuncting as well at Emerson and Berkeley. Now I have a full-time, I'm an associate professor at Framingham State University, and I'm on campus 2 times a week, so that helps a lot. I mean, that's an ultimately very flexible schedule. But I have found that regardless of the amount of time you have, it's amazing how you will fill it with other stuff than writing. And so the trick isn't so much only about fighting for the hours as it is just getting yourself to that desk and making that a priority, making that what Lauren Groff said is the boulder every day that everything else must go around. And I think when you treat it that way, the writing will flow. The pages will collect.
Any other questions? We have time for one more today.
Hello. Jennifer, I went to a talk of yours a year ago, and you mentioned something about window mirrors in the context of diversity. I'd like to hear you elaborate on what that means to you, and for the other two to share your definitions as well.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so nice to see you. So windows and mirrors comes from Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, who coined that phrase, talking about how books, especially children's books, should be windows where you can see into other experiences, and also mirrors where you might see aspects of yourself, right, in the stories, and how children need both windows and mirrors. So I think all our work really, hopefully others agree, work as both windows and mirrors.
Yeah, I mean, I got into writing. I mean, I always loved to write, but I really got serious about writing for children because I saw the need for mirrors specifically for my kids, because they would read books like Little House on the Prairie or, books that were not reflecting them, and they would try to squeeze into that, and they'd try to make it a mirror and be like, I want to be blonde, I want to be Christian, and like literally saying these things. And it was kind of terrifying for me because part of the reason I homeschool was so that they would feel free to be their own identity and valued and cherished. And so I felt like, okay, if I want to raise readers who also love themselves, we need more books that reflect them. And so that's been a big need that a lot of us have been working towards.
Yeah, I'll just add, for me, when I was little, there are a lot of books with white kids, so there I was, and yet I was a Greek-American child, so my experience was always like a little bit different. And then when the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding came out, that was my, mirror moment. I was like, there I am, that's my family. So, I write about rabbits, but I also do feature Greek-American protagonists in my books, and in fact, I'm working on one now, and I'm very proud of it because there's like a little bit of mythology in it and a little bit of some ancient elements, but there's a lot of books written by non-Greeks about Greek mythology, and they're very popular, and that's not what I want to do. I want to just have a kind of like, I don't know, more authentic or more kind of story that's more kind of true to my experience and the experience that I had as a child. So I'm actually very excited about one of the projects I'm working on for that reason.
Thank you all for your questions. And before we say a final thank you to our incredible panelists today, and let's say a big thank you to our amazing panelists.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us.